Now, ahead of the final announcement, we're already hearing about the mood being tense and that there are reports of violence that's broken out in Abidjan, many people injured. Why is this election make or break? Why is it creating so much tension?
Thanks. First of all, I think it's interesting to note that the first round was quite smooth. We didn't have any violence and the process went smoothly. That said, since early November, there's been an increasing number of clashes, not only in Abidjan, but in the western part of the country, which is the stronghold of the ruling party, and also a little bit in the north of the country controlled by the new forces. I think, what is at stake is power, and obviously you have very powerful interest groups which have a lot to lose in this process. Furthermore, it's the first presidential election since 2000, and actually the first election whatsoever since 2002. So clearly there is a lot at stake, I think. That's really the key problem.
Now, the UN says that for them, the vote was conducted democratically overall, despite some of these isolated cases that they see as isolated cases of abuses. Yet both sides have started to allege cheating before the formal announcement. Do you think these results will be fair and a fair reflection of what's happened?
I think generally yes, but clearly in some regions there's been some intimidation. I don't think that there's been any clear rigging as such, but some of the sides have prevented other voters from actually voting, and that's been the key issue. And it's especially true in the western part of the country, especially in the countryside, not in the cities.
President Gbagbo is still the incumbent ultimately, and he's already threatened to annul the results that are coming out of the north. Does he have the power to do that? And why is he focusing specifically on the north? I mean, this was the part of the country that was partitioned. It had the Force Nouvelle. Is there still an underlying political tension there?
I think the fact that he wants to have these results cancelled means that maybe his results across the country are not that good. Because in any case, his opponent Ouattara would probably win between 90 and 95% of the vote in the north, whether there are some irregularities or not. So that may be one indication of why he's trying to do so. But that said, I think it's the Constitutional Court which will have to eventually decide whether those results can be accounted for.
Now, the vote results that have been released are those that come from the overseas territories, and what they indicate is that people have voted 60% for Alassane Ouattara, 40% for Laurent Gbagbo. Does this reflect the general sentiment that exists in the Ivory Coast at the moment?
Maybe not entirely, because obviously the Ivorians living overseas only account for 0.5% of the total electorate. But I think what's interesting here is that if you look at the margin between the first and the second rounds, you'll see that Ouattara is up 12.5%, Gbagbo is up 4%. So it seems that the call by the PDCI, by former President Bédié, to vote for Ouattara in the second round may actually have been implemented at the grassroots level to some extent.
Now, under President Gbagbo, we've seen a transition unfold. We've seen an end to the war. We've also seen reinvestment in rehabilitating the infrastructure of the country, an improvement in cocoa production. We have a sense of what his economic strategy is. If Alassane Ouattara is to win this election, what is he offering the Ivorian people?
I think first of all, is contacts. He's been Deputy Managing Director at the IMF, which is the highest position that any African has ever held at the IMF. He's been the Governor of the Central Bank of West African States, which is the common central bank for CFA countries in that region. So clearly, he knows the right people internationally, and I think that international investors trust him to some extent. So that would be an upside. I mean, that said, he has a very general program. Well, he said that he needs about 12 billion CFA franc to fulfill his promises, and that's a huge amount of money. I mean, we're talking about I think $20 billion. So it's not really clear where he's going to get that financing.
Now, obviously, when the elections began in the first round, we were focusing on Ivory Coast's international bond and the yields at which it was trading and the extent to which the bond was a barometer for international sentiment. What's happened to the bond yields since then, and especially now that we're in this very tense session where we're waiting for the final election results to come through?
Yeah, well, the bond actually rallied ahead of the first round and a little bit after. So the price went from about 54 in August to 64 in early November. And then it stagnated, and in recent days, actually, it's declined. The price is now back to 56.5 to 59.5. So that means that global investors are afraid of the immediate outlook in Ivory Coast. But I think one important point here is that this price represents a yield of about 10.7% to 11.3%, and there is nowhere in the world, even in the EM space, where you can get those kind of rates. So if the situation improves and at the end of the day we have some kind of normalized political environment, obviously buying the Eurobond at those levels will be very profitable, because the high yield of Ivory Coast Eurobond actually represents the risk profile of the country. So an improvement in the risk profile means that the bond is going to rally.
And a final question to you, Samir. We know that Ivory Coast has since formed new strategic partnerships internationally, but I mean, some argue that France still has 35% market share in this Ivorian economy because of their very strong historical ties. But now there's the challenge to attract investors from new markets, particularly countries like Spain, countries like China, countries like Brazil. Are investors taking a wait-and-see approach in terms of foreign direct investment into Ivory Coast, or have people just completely ignored the elections? That's one thing, and said, well, the returns are going to be great, or have they just said, we will look at other West African economies like the Nigerias and the Senegals and forget what's going on in the Ivory Coast?
Yeah, I think to some extent there's been a wait-and-see attitude. I mean, obviously some investors have tried to do something in the mining space, in the oil sector, but overall a substantial improvement in FDI is probably going to be conditional on a normalized political environment. We've seen a lot of international investors looking at Ivory Coast because they see Ivory Coast as the largest and most developed country among the Francophone CFA economies in West Africa. But I think they're not ready to invest massively at this stage unless there is an improvement at the political level.